Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I have a full-length review of a Ngaio Marsh thriller, Spinsters in Jeopardy, starring the entire Alleyn family. This is one of only two novels where we meet Inspector Alleyn and Agatha Troy's son, Ricky, and the only one where he is a child. This is the 70th anniversary of this book, and if you did any research, you might notice that this book was first published in 1953, which would make this the 71st anniversary. The reason why I'm calling it the 70th anniversary retrospective is because I mistranscribed the year on my spreadsheet. Simple human error. I used the British publication date of 1954, not realizing this book was published in the US the year prior, but we're just going to pretend it's the 70th anniversary because I did all the work for this video already before I noticed my mistake. But anyway, my opinion of Spinsters in Jeopardy is similar to my opinion of last week's novel, The Man in the Brown Suit, and that it is a superior thriller novel, but not a superior novel in the grand scheme of these authors' works. Spinsters in Jeopardy is good in what it does, but it's not my favorite. It's not particularly iconic or good compared to the other Inspector Alleyn's novels, especially his more famous cases, and that leaves this novel as something of an outlier. As a refresher, I will give a spoiler-free summary up until the point of the culprit reveal, at which point I will warn you it's coming, and from that point forward, spoilers are fair game. And even more so than in last week's The Man in the Brown Suit, where exactly to end the spoiler free summary is questionable. There really is no mystery at all in this book. It's pure thriller. Now, there is a murder, and there is intrigue and, shadowiness, but it's pretty heavily indicated what is going on and who is responsible from the start. But I did my best in deciding where to make the cut. Before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Spinsters in Jeopardy begins with a heartwarming Alleyn family moment, which this is the only book this ever happens with. Despite having a son, this is only one of two books which Inspector Alleyn and Agatha Troy's son, little Ricky, appears. The other is Last Ditch, but he's an adult there. And this is also one of only two, the other being Last Ditch again, novels to feature Inspector Alleyn in mostly a thriller. Alleyn does find himself caught up in spy intrigue, but there's always a larger traditional murder mystery afoot. Not so much here. Agatha Troy is painting their young son, little Ricky, who is about 6 or 7, while she and her husband discuss some unusual fan mail she has been receiving for quite some time now. The mail is from a P.E. Garble, who claims to be a third cousin of Agatha Troy's, and he lives in Roqueville, a small village in the south of France. His letters are weird, to say the least, and often contain things like canceled bus and train tickets, and gives pretty clear indications about where he lives, hinting that Troy should go visit him. And this comes off as very creepy and stalkerish, but the Allens don't find it that way at all. They're actually pretty curious about P.E. Garble and who he is and what he wants, which is in keeping with their natural curiosity seen in other novels. And they decide to travel to France as a family to visit P.E. Garble because, this isn't weird at all. Alleyn has an assignment in the area of Roqueville because the French police are just so inept, as they tend to be in British-based mystery novels. Specifically, there's something shady going on at the nearby Chateau de la Chèvre d'Argent, which means the House of the Silver Goat. That name is really something else. Despite the dark plot of this book, it's actually a very lighthearted read. There's a lot of breaking that darkness and tension up with really strange comments and names like, the House of the Silver Goat. The Allens travel by train to Roqueville in France. On the train, Alleyn and Troy witness something odd going on in the Chateau de la Chèvre d'Argent, in which a man covered by a shadow appears to be either strangling a woman or stabbing her. We don't get a full description of what goes on because the Allens are on the moving train as it passes the chateau, so they don't get a clear look. It is actually very reminiscent of what happens at the beginning of Agatha Christie's 450 from Paddington, although this book was published first. And all of this is really odd, but they aren't exactly sure what they saw, or at least the narrative isn't clear, but this is interrupted when another train passenger, a Miss Truebody, has a burst appendix and requires medical attention. She's sort of like thrust upon the Allens because there isn't a doctor in the area, and the train employees just like can't be bothered with this dying woman. So the Allens agree to take Miss Truebody to the only doctor nearby, who is an Egyptian doctor named Dr. Ali Baradi, who is staying at the Chateau de la Chèvre d'Argent. While his parents are attending to Miss Truebody, Ricky was left alone and had a panic attack, as he's prone to when traveling in strange areas and when he's left alone. We know something sinister and cultish is going on at the chateau, and just to save words, I'm just going to be calling it the chateau from this point forward. From a brief prologue in which a Mr. Oberon is preparing some kind of induction for a new member named Ginny. This all reminded me of a previous Allen novel, Death and Ecstasy, which also involved a weird religious cult. The Allens bring Miss Truebody to the chateau where Dr. Barati is, and she's in very bad shape. Dr. Barati basically says she's at death's door. Alan is forced to assist with the surgery because there aren't any other doctors in the area, and Alan does have some like medical knowledge and training. Troy and Ricky were going to head to their hotel, but Miss Truebody is afraid and lonely, and she doesn't want Troy to leave her, so the mother and son stay. And, throughout this novel, the Allens display very questionable judgment in many regards, not the least of which is their parenting skills. They bring Ricky to the chateau where they know a murder just happened and is believed to be the hub of some large scale criminal activity in a foreign country when they know Ricky has panic attacks when he's in strange places. You can tell this is an adventure thriller because many mystery authors, not just Ngaio Marsh, when they write these rare thrillers, they tend to be looser constructed, not always in fitting in character. And you can almost sense a bit of relief and freedom in the writing because the author doesn't have to be concerned about plotting carefully and making sure things make sense. They kind of go wild and unrefined. It must be freeing, but it does tend to lead to these like out of the ordinary character moments and some off continuity issues and occasional plot holes. Alan agrees to help with the surgery mainly because no one else can, but also because he wants to establish a relationship with the people at the chateau. We're put on notice pretty clearly here that the chateau is suspected of dealing in drugs because one of Alan's stories is that he can pretend to be a heroin addict who shows up at the chateau as an excuse to visit, although now he has a much better excuse in that he's simply on vacation with his family and can check in with Miss Truebody. While Alan and their hired driver Raoul assist Barati during the operation, Troy has the unfortunate situation of meeting the rest of the people at the chateau, all of whom belong to a cult called Children of the Sun. There's Grizzle Locke, a vaguely notorious British socialite who seems frightened by everything and likes to sunbathe in the nude. Ginny Taylor, the newest acolyte who is not yet a full-fledged member. Robin Carrington, who very obviously wants Ginny out of the chateau but can never seem to get her to leave. There's Carberry Gland, a painter whom Troy knows, and she begs him to keep her identity a secret. The issue with Carberry Gland is that he may know Troy is married to a policeman. Remember, Alan's identity as an inspector is a secret. And there's also Annabella Wells, who is an actress whom Alan very clearly had a fling with pre-Troy. If you think back to those early Alan novels, he fell hard for actresses in Enter a Murderer and Vintage Murder. Weirdly, the narration treats Annabella Wells as someone we're supposed to know, but I don't remember her in any previous novel or short story, which is weird. I could be wrong, though. I suspect I'm not. Annabella Wells knows Alan is a policeman and he begs her to keep that secret, which she agrees to, but Alan doesn't really trust her. She also gets mad that Alan tells her that she needs to leave the chateau because she's clearly strung up on heroin and wasting away. She's described as weighing almost nothing, and she's so skinny and frail now. Most importantly, we have Monsieur Oberon, the cult leader, who also goes by the name Ra, the Egyptian sun god. He's weird, as one would expect, and takes a mutual dislike to Troy almost immediately. He's very controlling of his guests, but in a polite way that makes him even more unsettling and sinister. Miss Truebody survives the surgery, but she's still not in good condition. Oberon credits himself for her survival, even though he did absolutely nothing to assist anyone. He couldn't even bother to get out of bed to help her. The Allens leave Miss Truebody in the care of Dr. Barati, but on the way out, they throw out the name P.E. Garble just to see what kind of reaction they get. Everyone denies knowing P.E. Garble, but they do a very bad job of lying about it. They're very clearly nervous and panicked about hearing the name. While Alan stays behind at the chateau for a little while, Raoul drives Troy and Ricky into Roqueville, but not before Ricky has another panic attack in which his loving parents foist him onto Raoul, who speaks no English because, their parenting skills are really rough here. It's not that they're bad or neglectful parents, but they aren't making the best decisions regarding Ricky pretty much at every time they have the chance to. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Alan tells Troy that Mr. Oberon is really a British millionaire and drug baron. Raoul calms Ricky down, which is the first of their close bond forming. Marie, an elderly woman who sells figurines, gives Ricky a little silver goat toy which he finds comfort in. Raoul drives Troy and Ricky into Rockville. Troy attempts to visit P.E. Garble's apartment, but he isn't there. And I can't get into this now, but the passages where Troy visits this apartment and finds the building manager provide really excellent cluing as to what's going on. There is an adventure thriller mostly here, and it's not much mystery going on, but what mystery there is, it's actually brilliantly clued, believe it or not. Meanwhile, back at the chateau, Alan finds P.E. Garble's name on a list of financial transactions, so Garble is somehow connected. He's also accosted by Dr. Berardi and Carberry Gland about his occupation. Alan sort of suspects the jig is up, but he still holds true and pretends not to be a policeman and says he's a game hunter. Specifically, he says he's, a hunter, which he means that he hunts criminals so as not to lie, but they assume he means he's a big game hunter, and he just plays along with that, which is really funny. I can't think of a less suitable occupation for Alan than a big game hunter. But he also learns that Monsieur Oberon is a fan of Agatha Troy's and has one of her paintings. Annabella Wells keeps Alan's promise to keep his occupation a secret, despite a lot of pressure from Oberon and Barati for her to confirm that he's a policeman. They don't trust Alan and they don't want him coming to the chateau again. On the drive to Rockville, Alan basically tells Raoul everything, which again seems a little questionable considering he just met Raoul. But Alan trusts Raoul because Raoul also hates Oberon and Barati. His girlfriend Teresa works as a maid at the chateau, and he's concerned about her safety because Oberon has basically been treating Teresa as a sex object and comments really rudely on her body. Raoul thinks Teresa is in danger, but Teresa needs the money, so she refuses to leave his employment. Raoul also thinks Oberon is involved in the sex trade, but Alan confirms no, it's only drugs. Raoul also tells Alan that on Fridays there's a weird ritual at the chateau where something odd happens with the women, but he's not sure what exactly. We're told that it's definitely drugs, and I think Ngaio Marsh here, she's mitigating any uncomfortableness about the sex trade. The sex trade is a very taboo subject, and it's one of those ones writers are not supposed to talk about in mystery novels. And I think Marsh quickly throws, this sort of line about, oh no, it's definitely only drugs, as a way to not turn her readers off. When Alan pulls up at the hotel, he finds Troy in a fluster. Ricky has disappeared. Troy put Ricky down for a nap, then took a bath and had lunch in the hotel dining room, and when she returned, he was gone. Alan is calm under pressure, but it still seems a little strange just how calm he is, knowing that his son is missing. Troy is also calm, but not as relaxed as Alan. Ricky isn't in the hotel, nor in the area nearby. The hotel staff didn't see anyone enter, but a bouquet of flowers was left at the Allen's hotel door, apparently by P.E. Garble, who left a note saying, sorry he missed them, but he's going away for a bit. Alan and Troy spot Ricky on the balcony of a somewhat nearby building, but a quote-unquote fat woman takes him inside. Ricky was calm and waved to his parents when he saw them. This leads Alan to suspect that Ricky isn't in any actual danger, but his disappearance is meant only as a distraction. Interestingly, the building where Ricky was is P.E. Garble's apartment, but he's gone by the time the Allens arrive. Alan searches the apartment and finds dresses and women's hats and realizes that P.E. Garble is not a man, but a woman. When they look over Garble's letters to Troy, the Allens realize that Troy assumed Garble was a man, and Garble seemingly picked up on that and played along. And all the stuff about Garble's bus tickets and the route she takes is really a coded cry for help. Garble is a chemist and is caught up in the drug ring of the Chateau de la Chèvre d'Argent, and Alan believes Garble might have found herself unwittingly in this position. Eventually, the police do show up in the form of a Monsieur Dupont, who is a complete idiot. He reminds me a lot of Monsieur Giraud, Poirot's dolt rival from Murder on the Lings. Dupont insists there's nothing to worry about because there's a kidnapping ring in the area, but they were recently caught, so the Ricky must be safe, which, I don't know if that's a reason not to be alarmed. A mysterious voice calls on the phone and tells Alan that Ricky is being held for ransom in a small village about 70 miles away. But Alan realizes pretty quickly this is a bluff, and Ricky is likely being held at the chemical factory, which is located about halfway between the Chateau de la Chèvre d'Argent and Roqueville. Raoul secretly drives the Allens there, and a bit of a humorous scene here. They lie to the desk clerk at the factory, who doesn't speak any English, to get inside. They have this plan they make up where Raoul says he saw a man and a woman driving Ricky into the factory. Monsieur Collard, the factory director, claims he doesn't know anything about Ricky, which, very clearly a lie here. The Allens are able to basically manipulate him, and what do you know? Ricky is found safe inside the factory. Ricky is okay and displays a lot more awareness than his parents do. He's fine, but he's angry his parents let him get kidnapped and doesn't understand why they let that happen. And, quite frankly, neither do I. As Ricky explains, a woman with a mustache came into the hotel room and said she was his nanny, and that she was taking him to his parents who were at P.E. Garble's apartment. This was a lie, but Ricky didn't know any better because he's like 7 years old. And while at the apartment, the mustached woman met up with, and I apologize for this, but I'm going to directly quote what Ricky says here. Quote, "a fat, smelly black woman," unquote, who is the concierge at the apartment complex. And I will discuss the depiction of this woman more in my criticism section, but because it's actually a lot worse than what I just described. Once Alan and Troy spotted Ricky on the balcony, the mustached woman and a driver, who Ricky describes as a man with black teeth, took Ricky to the factory. Ricky left his goat behind, apparently as a clue for his parents, because he realized at that moment he was actually being kidnapped, because Ricky, does understand some French, which the kidnappers assumed he did not. So he pieced together what was happening, once again revealing Ricky as perhaps the smartest character in this book. Alan uncovers proof that Monsieur Collard is connected to the chateau, and is also the ringleader of that kidnapping gang, because he suddenly speaks with an American accent, and Alan claims kidnappings are an American thing and are all the rage in the US, which I guess that's a thing. Ricky identifies a man named George as the driver of the car and Teresa as his kidnapping nanny. Teresa is Raoul's girlfriend who was tricked into kidnapping Ricky. As she explains it, she was told she was going to be Ricky's nanny and wound up inadvertently kidnapping him. How she didn't see through this flimsy story Mr. Oberon put to her is extremely baffling unless one accepts that she's just a complete dolt, which is actually fairly easy to believe if I'm being honest. Raoul apologizes to the Allens because he somehow knew Teresa was the kidnapper and lied to protect her, and the Allens are completely undeterred by this. They just wave it off as no big deal, when this is a very big deal. This man lied to protect your son's kidnapper, and they don't care at all. And mainly they don't care because Alan needs Raoul and Teresa to help him crack down at the Chateau de la Chèvre d'Argent by having Teresa sneak them in so they can disguise themselves in white hooded robes, and this is not a KKK outfit, I swear, so they can infiltrate it from within during that weird ceremony. Before they can go through with this plan, Alan is approached by Robin Harrington, who has concerns about Ginny. Ginny is very young and impressionable. She was orphaned as a small child and eventually fell under the control of Monsieur Oberon. Robin is worried that Oberon is forcing Ginny into drugs and other vices and wants to protect her. Ginny is going to be the guest of honor at this ceremony Oberon is having, which means she's basically the lead sacrifice. Ginny is supposed to wear a black hooded garment, so Alan asks Robin to get him Ginny's robe in addition to a white one. Robin tricks Ginny out of the chateau so Raoul can take her place. Raoul is short for a man and rather small, so he can pass for Ginny in a hooded robe in the dark. Marsh goes to great lengths to explain how this ruse is possible to pull off. The police had shut off the electricity at the chateau, and there's a storm brewing, so it's very dark. Alan and Raoul sneak into the chateau, and Alan is almost immediately caught by Barati. Alan comes up with this lie about how he was just swinging by to check up on Miss Truebody, to which Barati tells him that Miss Truebody died. He takes Alan to see the body, and despite being dark and the body being covered with the veil, Alan immediately notices this body is not Miss Truebody. He does this hilarious bit of pretending to gag and throw up over seeing the body, which he winds up assaulting Dr. Barati in the process. And this seems like a good place to end the spoiler-free section. This is an adventure thriller, so it's a little difficult to decide where to end this, but I'm going to end it here. So back out if you don't want to be spoiled. You've been warned. Alan gets away from Barati and takes his spot pretending to be Robin in Robin's room. Raoul, meanwhile, takes Ginny's place in her room and dresses in her cloak and slippers. He's basically in drag here. A Grizzle Locke enters Robin's room and believes she is talking to Robin, but it's really Alan. And she tells him that he cannot let Ginny go through with this. Ginny is too young to have her life ruined by drugs and by Oberon like she had hers. Alan tries to keep up the act and remain silent, as everyone is supposed to be silent in this pre-ceremony ritual, but he eventually gives that up and uses Grizzle Locke of being P.E. Garble. He recognized some of Garble's speech patterns as matching her letters. She admits that's true, and the dead body that's supposed to be Miss Truebody is actually the real Grizzle Locke, who is Ginny's aunt, who tried to get Ginny out of the chateau but was murdered. P.E. Garble does not know who murdered Grizzle Locke. She wrote to Troy to try to get Alan involved and expose Oberon as a drug baron, but she had to be very sly about it because Oberon monitors her letters, so she had to be very subtle and hope Alan and Troy could decode her pleas for help, which they don't until they're already in France. The ending of this book is actually very fantastic, albeit a bit ridiculous. Alan and Raoul do infiltrate this ceremony and surprise Oberon. Oberon and Barati immediately drop their tough, fearless leader acts and become whiny little babies. Oberon is actually naked throughout this entire scene, which is really funny, but Oberon and Barati turn on each other. They turn on Annabella Wells and P.E. Garble. They are arrested along with Carberry Gland, and it's unclear what happens with Annabella Wells. It's not exactly clear if she's arrested or not. Alan had warned her that she would be, but we get no proof of that towards the end. P.E. Garble, though, is spared. It does appear Carberry Gland turns on Oberon because he was told that Grizzle Locke died in an overdose and was shocked to learn that Barati had actually stabbed her to death. And this is kind of gross and icky here, but Alan figures out that Barati is the one who murdered Grizzle Locke, not Oberon, because that dark shadow he saw over the man's face when they passed by on the train, that wasn't really a shadow, but it was Barati's dark skin. Again, this is icky, but that's what's in the book, and again, I will cover this more in my criticism section. Miss Truebody is alive and doing much better. The book ends on this note of Alan thanking P.E. Garble for making the sacrifice and attempting to call him in, even though she was in potential legal danger and also potential mortal danger, as Oberon and Barati could have murdered her if they had decided to. The end. Let's get into praise. And like I said earlier, I think Spinsters in Jeopardy is a very solid novel for a thriller by an author who doesn't typically write them. It's a light, jaunty read, and it does have that roller coaster up and down reeling sensation to it. I know I mocked it a little bit, but this is actually an incredibly realistic adventure thriller, and yes, there are some ridiculous moments, but it never goes off the rails. Nothing unbelievable happens. I can believe 100% of the events of this book could happen in real life, which is something I wouldn't even say about, like, the man in the brown suit. There isn't a lot of mystery in this, despite there being a murder and other questions unanswered. And I did find the story to be a compelling and interesting one. You could feel the thriller elements at play. And like I said, the murder is something of an afterthought, and there really isn't much intrigue with, like, the drug smuggling ring. But the biggest important mystery is the truth about P.E. Garble, and I think that's excellently clued. We're led to believe Garble is a man through Marsh deceiving us in a way the characters talk about Garble and the way Garble writes, and not through lying to us or withholding information. There are great subtle clues to indicate this. The concierge at the apartment complex speaks only French, and Troy does not speak French, so there's a miscommunication. Marsh writes this passages in French, so I think a good chunk of readers nowadays might miss the clues, but back in the 50s, there were probably a lot more British and Americans who understood French, or at least pretty basic French. But Troy inquires about P.E. Garble, as she calls him Monsieur Garble, and the concierge replies, "No, mademoiselle," referencing Garble as mademoiselle, but Troy replies, "No, I'm madame, not mademoiselle," because she thinks the concierge is calling her mademoiselle. But we're also told that the apartment is full of middle-aged spinsters. I do wish this intrigue over P.E. Garble's gender lasted longer, because her identity is kept hidden toward the end, but we learn she's a woman pretty early on. And I know I criticized a lot of the actions during the sequence, but I do think Ricky's kidnapping plot is very good. It is inconsistent in tone, but Marsh does such a good job of depicting Troy's emotions in particular. She's panicking and she blames herself, but there's also like a petrifying calmness to her. You can sense her emotional wreckage state she's in, and it does contrast with Alan well. Alan, being a policeman, knows how to remain calm under pressure, and he's very confident Ricky is safe, but he's still concerned. Alan is someone who does often mix the business and the personal, and when it's his own son at stake, it's even more so. And I think the kidnapping is the peak of the novel, despite the flaws it has. I also think the ending is hilarious. Alan and Raoul infiltrating the ceremony in the way they do is a lot of fun, and the total collapse of Oberon and Barati is hilarious. They crumble like little babies the moment they are exposed and faced any adversity. I rank Spinsters in Jeopardy at number 16 of 32 Allen novels, and I think that's probably a little too high. I would lower it maybe to like 18, 19 sort of. Not because my opinion of this book went down. It didn't. I still enjoy it as much as I always had. But I would probably defer more now towards mystery novels. I think a traditional mystery novel of equal quality deserves to go above a thriller. And also, this book is not one of the more important or popular Marsh novels out there, so I think if I were to redo the list, this one would drop a few spots, but nothing major, and my opinion overall did not change. Again, this book is still pretty good. I still enjoyed it. And like with most thrillers, I have a lot of issues with this book. It does lack a lot of intrigue and mystery, and even though the story is good and interesting, the reader always sort of knows where it's going. There are very few surprises in this novel. And as is typical with thrillers from primarily mystery authors, Marsh slacks a bit in the tightness of this book. She makes a few small but noticeable continuity errors. For instance, the distance between Roqueville and the Chateau de la Chèvre d'Argent keeps changing. Sometimes we're told they are very near each other. Sometimes we're told they're over 100 miles apart. Certainly with the frequency the characters go back and forth, we would seem to imply they're pretty close together. And there are inconsistencies in the recurring characters that do not gel with previous and future novels. Alan and Troy make very questionable decisions regarding pretty much everything, but especially with Ricky. They leave Ricky alone a lot, even though they know he gets scared easily. Their indifference to Raoul and Teresa when they learn Teresa kidnapped Ricky is so bizarre to me. And I understand it was an accident, but they don't seem to care at all that, like, not only what Teresa did, but also, like, Raoul actively covered up for her, which also brings about another plot hole regarding how Raoul knew Teresa was the kidnapper. If you backtrack through Raoul's movements, he really couldn't have known that. The Allens are somewhat irresponsible by bringing Ricky to the chateau, where they know a murder happened, if not worse. I mean, they leave him with strangers who are on drugs at times. I just found this so uncharacteristic of them, and I don't think you could argue, oh, it's just like parents like Alan that did this in the 1950s, because legitimately seemed to disregard Ricky at multiple times. Nor does this appear to be them like raising Ricky in a way that he can overcome his panic attacks. It comes across as almost negligent. Again, that's not to say they're bad parents or don't love Ricky. It's just weird. And we also have some icky moments, like I made reference to the comments about the concierge at the apartment complex, which are not good. And you could argue that, well, Ricky as a child, he didn't know any better than to make those comments, but his parents do not correct him. And they also make similar comments. And Dr. Barati also has an unflattering portrayal as well. He's an Arab, and his skin color is used as part of the cluing for the murder, where Alan mistakes his dark skin for a shadow. It's uncomfortable and inappropriate. And while I think the concierge stuff is both worse and more frequent, the Barati stuff is a big knock because that's part of the plot where the concierge stuff could have been removed and you would have the plot the same. You can't do that with Barati. And there's also sort of like this opinion, I guess you could say, that, well, because the concierge and Barati are awful people, you can just make whatever horrible comments about them you want, and it's really uncomfortable. I also feel at times there are too many plots going on. We have the drug ring, Ricky's kidnapping, the murder of the real Grizzle Lock, the Miss Truebody stuff, the search for P.E. Garble, among other things. It feels like a lot of events that sometimes take a back seat at certain points. The murder of Grizzle Lock is brought up at the beginning, and then it's not ever really discussed again until the end. It never really felt like any of these plots outside of the Ricky kidnapping received enough care and attention. And the last thing here is that some of the characters don't get enough development, in particular the other guests at the chateau, like, Carberry Gland and Robin Harrington. We do have at times these short passages with these people at the chateau where they discuss things like how to get rid of Alan and whatnot. And they were fine scenes, but I did feel like it cut into the narrative a lot and produced some awkward transitions without really giving us the character content I think they were supposed to for the chateau guests. I could have done without them. They didn't really add anything that they were supposed to. Let's move on to characters, and starting with our heroes of Inspector Roderick Alleyn. And this was a tough one to assess the Alleyn content because he isn't really investigating. He knows the plot from the beginning. Now, I did like seeing all of his family content. This is really the only book we get a heavy look into the Alleyn family dynamics, and we get this softer side of Alleyn with him giving Ricky piggyback rides and calming him down when he gets upset. There are very few literary detectives who are fathers of small children, so this is a rather unique moment. And he's pretty fun here. He's his usual sarcastic self. His interactions with Troy and Ricky are believable. I think the lack of Inspector Fox in this novel sort of leaves him on an island because he can't bounce work ideas off of Troy, and Raoul is just not a good substitute for Fox. And I did find his depiction inconsistent with previous books, and while all of his usual characteristics are present, I do feel some of his actions were questionable and he lacked good judgment at times. I talked a lot about this already. I still enjoyed Alan, and he felt like Alan, but there were inconsistent moments when he came across as uncaring and lacking in intelligence, which were strange. It's a similar story for Agatha Troy. She too lacked good judgment, although I did feel as if her portrayal was a little more consistent with past appearances than her husband's. Her emotional panic and blaming herself during Ricky's kidnapping is very effective and well drawn, and despite all that, she does remain calm and effective in the search for Ricky. She doesn't fall to pieces, and while that might seem odd for parents of kidnapping victims, it makes sense for Troy because she has her husband with her who has experience in this and can keep her grounded and focused on the task at hand. But again, I do think some of the things she does are questionable and out of character. She's so willing to forgive Teresa and Raoul, and she too leaves Ricky alone in strange places, including in a mansion where she witnessed a murder happen and where her husband is investigating drug smuggling rings. It's part of a weird cult. But overall, I did find Troy compelling and interesting in this novel. Again, we don't see a lot of mothers of small children from the point of a recurring character in mystery novels, at least not to the importance of Agatha Troy, so that was different as well. And I do apologize for using book covers for the photos from this point forward. There are no adaptations of this novel, so no actors for me to use their photos for their characters. I actually liked the presence of Ricky in this book. I often find prominent child characters in literature meant for adults to be very annoying and distracting, but I enjoyed Ricky. I always referred to him as a little Ricky, like on I Love Lucy, which little Ricky Ricardo also debuted in 1953, but that's just a coincidence. He's a very believable child. Oftentimes, these genius children are just incredible, and you don't believe the things they say and the things they do. But I found Ricky to be a real child, which is amazingly considering Ngaio Marsh did not have children and did not spend a lot of time with children. And perhaps that reflects more on the way Alan and Troy act as parents than Ricky does as a child. But he's smart for his age, but not to a ridiculous degree. And in many ways, he was the most aware person in the novel. I love when he asks his parents why they let him be kidnapped because, I also wonder the same thing. Just the way they left him alone all the time. Not that they let him be taken, but their neglect of him was really dumb at times. And I liked his relationship with Raoul. I appreciate that Ngaio Marsh gave him this big role in the novel, but also kept him a believable child. He did not go around tackling the bad guy or finding dangerous evidence. He handles his kidnapping so well where he's able to figure out that he was kidnapped even before his kidnapper does, which is funny. He brought a necessary lightness to this novel, I think. Moving on to our murderer in Dr. Ali Barati, who does not have a good depiction, as I already brought up. It's not that an Arab person could not be the murderer, but it's the fact that he is Arab and Egyptian that makes him suspicious, almost connecting his ethnic background to deviant behavior. And I didn't like that his race was used as a clue, but putting that aside, I did find him an effective villain as this henchman of sorts to Oberon. He does give you that creepy vibe in the way he's always staring at Troy and Alan. He's very unsettling as a person, but he does present himself sort of as the friendlier parallel to Oberon. And by all accounts, he is a good doctor. He does save Miss Truebody. And while he is a very credible murderer, I didn't find his motive to murder the real Grizzle to be entirely convincing. It's not that her potential exposure of the cult isn't a motive for him to murder her, but it would have been a more effective motive for Oberon to do it. But I think character-wise, Barati makes a little more sense, as I'll get into. And our other culprit is the non-murderer, Monsieur Oberon, who is, of course, a con artist and a British millionaire. And this is the second character in this mold Marsh created after Father Garnett from Death and Ecstasy, who I would say is the better version of this archetype. But I still found Oberon compelling. He's based on a real person who started a religious cult in Auckland, New Zealand, I believe. It might be a different city, whom Marsh's father organized an angry mob and drove out of town. And this obviously left a huge impression on Marsh since he used it at least twice in her books. And like I made reference to when I talked about Barati, it would have made more sense for Oberon to have murdered Grizzle because he has more at stake, but it also doesn't at the same time because Oberon is a coward. He crumbles at the first instance of adversity and becomes literally a crying naked baby. It is entirely believable that he just couldn't murder someone when he needed to. And we see similar things play out over the course of the book where, he's the mastermind of the events like the drug ring and the Ricky kidnapping, but he never plays an active hand. And while you could chalk this up to him being the leader and having underlings, Marx makes it pretty clear that he lacks the guts to do so. He's a wimp, and he becomes, again, literally the emperor with no clothes on. It's just funny to me how he has all this power and control over his cult via drugs, but he can't actually get them to do anything. He loses control of Robin Harrington. He loses control of Grizzle Locke. P.E. Garble turns on him. He can't get information of Annabelle Wells. He loses control of Teresa. Oberon is someone with a lot of hard power, but cannot utilize it for himself in an active and effective way. Our only murder victim is the real Grizzle Locke, whom I will not talk about because you don't even know her, but I will talk about the fake Grizzle Locke in P.E. Garble, who, for me, was the best one-time character from this book. I did love how quick on her feet she was, and trying to lure Alan to Roqueville and pretending to be a man and carefully wording her letters because Oberon was monitoring them. She's a chemist, and that's a chemist in the American sense of, one who performs chemistry, not the British sense of a pharmacist. And I think we can assume she tells us the truth about her accidentally getting caught up and there is some sympathy thrown her way, but it's not all sympathetic. Allen is critical of her actions, and although she ends the novel on the road to redemption, she's not fully redeemed, which I think is interesting. And I also like her trajectory across the novel, where she initially comes off as like a creepy stalker, and then we learn she's writing extremely cryptic clues that no one solves, which was appropriate. I've railed against cryptic clues a lot on this channel, and it was very refreshing to see like cryptic clues flop for a change. No one interpreted them in the way they were supposed to. Raul Milano, the driver, was a tough one for me to assess. On one hand, his relationship with Ricky is heartwarming and endearing, and he serves as Alan's confidant since Inspector Fox is absent. And this was an odd choice. Raul, while hired by the police for Alan, is not affiliated with them, so I don't fully understand why Alan confides in him, and it's really to his detriment. And Raul does have some fun moments, particularly towards the end, where he pretends to be Ginny and has to dress up like her. But on the other hand, I don't think a modern reader would find Raul all that likable. He has very uncomfortable views about women, in particularly his own girlfriend, Teresa. He has questionable views on racial minorities. He aided a kidnapper after the fact, and he's also described very strangely as effeminate and almost othered. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, and over time, I think this portrayal grows increasingly negative and has not aged well, which is a shame because I think when written, Raul was probably a standout and a very effective character, and there's a lot of potential there, but I just think in like 2024, it doesn't stand the test of time. Raul's girlfriend Teresa was barely in the book, but she does play a big factor. And I think Marsh does an effective job of making Teresa an idiot. I fully believe she did not understand she was kidnapping a child, which is just such a bizarre thing not to know. It's also not an easy task to pull off, so I give Marsh a lot of credit here. I don't have much else to say about her. She was barely in the book, but when she was on the page, I at least thought she was effective. Ginny Taylor is actually a very similar character to Teresa, although I would say she is less of an idiot and more naive, though less credible in that position. I understand how Teresa could not realize she was a kidnapper, but I do not understand how Ginny did not know she was about to join a drug cult, if not something worse. And to be fair, I mean, we do get a backstory about Ginny being orphaned at a young age and just not having like an awareness in life. She was raised by the real Grizzlelog who brings her to Oberon, and that's how she got caught up in all that. But it doesn't ring true. And not that it's totally unbelievable, but I felt Ginny could have used a little more care and attention. I didn't really care about the plot to save her, other than the way it ended, which I found very interesting and fun. It actually reminded me a lot of Dracula and the plans to save like Lucy and Mina from this outside influence looking to steal their innocence. Same sort of story with Robin Harrington. I did find him more interesting and compelling, but I wasn't enthralled by him either. I did like his cunning, and despite being a member of the Children of the Sun, he did not seem to be a captive. He pulls a fast one on Oberon and doesn't seem to be a drug addict. Now, it's unclear like how he actually got into the chateau in the first place, but I did appreciate the role he played and how betrayed he felt by Oberon and Brody, who was lying to them at every turn. I do question how he was able to get Ginny out of the house towards the end of the novel, because he spends most of the novel trying and failing to get her out, so for her to just like conveniently leave at the end, it did seem a little bit of a coincidence, but it's not a big deal. Carberry Gland, the painter colleague of Agatha Troy, he was pretty good. He straddled the line between like general cult member and leadership. He appeared to be close to Oberon and Brody and was actually pretty smart in how to handle Alan and Troy. Unfortunately, no one listened to him, so they wound up bungling pretty much everything. It's unclear how much Carberry Gland knew about the chateau and the drug ring. I do tend to think he knew at least about the drugs, or at least had an idea of what was going on, because he did seem to have some concern about Alan being a policeman, but I enjoyed his brief meeting with Troy and her panicking over if he knows Alan is a policeman, which, I mean, we never really get a clear answer on, but he's seemingly at least aware of something along those lines. I enjoyed Carberry Gland. I wish we could have seen more of him, as he was a more fun villain sort of character than like Oberon or Barati were. Annabella Wells is another character we did not see a lot of, but I thought she was very good when we did see her. She's an actress who had a fling with Alan at one point in time, and if you remember back to like the pre-Troy books, Alan loved actresses. He fell hard for them. And Annabella Wells is described as having been beautiful at one point, but was now made ugly by drugs, and she's clearly an addict. Alan basically tells her like she has to get out or be arrested, and she'd rather be arrested. We're told her work suffered and she can't get any roles. She does trust Alan, but she's not willing to give up her drugs yet. So, she's not controlled by them as much as like other people were, and that doesn't give in to Oberon. She keeps Alan's secret and she lies about him and about Alan. She gives the reader the impression like her drug use is mostly recreational and she could give it up at any time. It's not that she's an addict, because the drugs weren't the bargaining chip for her. I think they could have been. And the final character is Miss Truebody, aptly named for a victim of a body switch. We don't know much about her, as she spends about 95% of the book unconscious, but she's worth discussing, as she is technically one of the title characters. She seemed to be attached to Troy and generally seemed like a nice, appreciative woman. We know she comes from the Caribbean and has no relatives. I can only imagine how painful her surgery was, since it was basically makeshift and assisted by people who didn't really have all that much experience. I wish she maybe had like a part to play in the mystery that was going on. Like maybe she saw something, but she couldn't be sure if it was an illusion caused by anesthesia or the pain or whatever. But she mainly just gets used to pass off another woman's corpse as her own. It was not meant to be. But again, I think there was a little more potential, a little more that could have been done with her. But she was fine as is. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think about Spinsters in Jeopardy. I know I poked fun at it quite a bit, but I really do enjoy this book. It's one of the best thrillers by a mystery author out there. Next week, I am back to discussing short stories, which I haven't done in a long time, and this time with someone I haven't really talked about. I will be ranking all 14 short stories featuring Agatha Christie's duo of Mr. Harley Quinn and Mr. Satterthwaite. I've always enjoyed these, and a viewer requested this video, so I thought I would make it happen sooner rather than later. And I will rank all 14 short stories, those being the 12 in the Mysterious Mr. Quinn collection, and the 2 that are not there in the Love Detectives and the Harlequin tea set, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.